Final Fantasy XIV 7.2 is finally bringing the content a lot of us have been waiting for, but there's an elephant in the room. Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and 7.2 for Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail isn't until the end of March, or late March, which is a cool month and a half to just under 2-month window of time that we still have to wait for a lot of this content to come out for Final Fantasy XIV. You may be going, Jmulls, well, what's the problem? What's the issue? And that is the case of the monthly sub, a monetization method that fans of MMORPGs are quite familiar with. Many other MMOs have a monthly sub to continue playing the game. Games like RuneScape, World of Warcraft, and Final Fantasy XIV, and many others. It's not a unique phenomenon to Final Fantasy XIV or anything like that. However, it's an interesting conversation that crops up every time one of these sub-based MMOs has what is perceived to be a content drought. A period of time with, well, no content. And it's a bit weird because many people perceive the beginning of Dawntrail right now to be a content drought. And I kind of understand why, because if you're not doing any kind of instance-based raiding, well, there's just not that much new to do, and the stuff that is there, if you've played for multiple expansions, you've done all this stuff before. People are chomping at the bit, especially with the launch of a new expansion and a whole new adventure and journey for new. They're craving something new and exciting to draw them in, make them want to sink their teeth into this experience and dump hundreds of hours. And people were looking forward to content like Cosmic Exploration, which just sounds really cool, and from the live letter for 7.2 also looked pretty dang cool. Again, we have to wait and see how it actually plays, but conceptually, I rather like it. Same thing with the new Bozja type content, with the Occult Crescent. Looks really cool. I like the idea of the Phantom Jobs. I am really interested to get my hands on all of those fights, and the zone itself looks rather pretty. I really enjoyed Bozja while I was playing it currently, so chances are I'm going to enjoy the Occult Crescent. But there's another elephant in the room. There's actually two, not just the fact that 7.2 isn't until the end of March, or late March. It's also that, like, let's be realistic here. I'm imagining most of this content is actually going to come in 7.25, which is about another 2 months after the release of 7.2. That is a tall ask for people, especially in a modern scene with a modern audience. That is a tall ask to ask people to pay monthly for a game where you're telling them they have to wait months and months of time for the content they really want to sink their teeth into. It's not a unique phenomenon. Final Fantasy XIV has absolutely had periods of downtime in its past. And if you've been playing Final Fantasy XIV for a while like I have, this early drought of content for an expansion is the norm. And I'm not going to argue that that's a good thing. It's something that I do think requires systemic change and overhaul at Square Enix. But it is also nothing particularly new. But I think what we're seeing in terms of community reaction to Final Fantasy XIV and Dawntrail specifically right now is a confluence of numerous different factors with the state of the game right now. You don't really have the previous emotional investment from players during the middle of the Heidelin Zodiac arc. That arc is done, and we're on a new adventure. Another element is that the beginning of that new adventure wasn't well received by many people. And then on top of that, the formula of Final Fantasy XIV is starting to be perceived as stale and stagnant. And when you throw in a giant weight for content on top of all of that, it amplifies community reaction. I've been talking about on this channel for a while now how the release cadence of a Final Fantasy XIV expansion and all of its pieces of content largely being relegated to the later patches is detrimental to the state of the game, because there's no period of time in I was going to say Final Fantasy XIV, but in an MMO expansion's life, then the beginning of that expansion, when everyone is chomping at the bit to sink their claws, to sink their teeth into the new content, they want to be immersed, they want to dump a whole lot of hours into the game, that is when the hype is at its ripest, when it's ready for plucking, because it's an MMO, it's a multiplayer game. Hype builds on itself like a snowball going down a snowy mountain. But with the way that Final Fantasy XIV is constructed, a lot of that endgame content that feels unique to the expansion is relegated to, say, the 0.2 or beyond patches, let alone the new limited job, which is not until like the end of the entire cycle for an expansion. So that initial hype you could have had at the beginning of an expansion if you had launched with all of this content, or at least a good amount of it, if you have launched with that content and you're able to strike when the iron is hot, you can build on that hype and extend like the overall life window for that expansion and community hype and sentiment towards it. But when you delay it down the road to try and bolster out that patch cadence and that cycle, you miss out on that initial window of hype, and you're no longer striking while the iron is hot. The iron is already cooling in the water. So while I can kind of understand the logic in let's delay a lot of these endgame systems and features for later in the patch cycle, that way it's a more even distribution of content and hype, like that can work, don't get me wrong, it's worked for Final Fantasy XIV up to this point, mostly speaking. I just don't think it particularly works anymore, if it ever really worked before. Especially with the competition that is out there for Final Fantasy XIV. And many of you may be thinking I'm talking about World of Warcraft here, and in some part I am, but I'm not just talking about Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft's recent rivalry. There's a bunch of other games, and also, not just in the MMO genre, but just other genres of game out there that people feel gravitated to. I know gacha games aren't for everyone, and I've largely kind of moved away from them myself, but look at the content value on offer there. And compared to, say, Final Fantasy XIV, where you have 4 months in between each new update, alongside a monthly sub and having to buy an expansion on top of an in-game store and shop, we'll get to that. Sure, gacha as a monetization method is really crappy. Sorry, I just absolutely housed a bagel and some iced coffee like I'm in a Tomos. Alright, now where was I? Oh yeah, there's a lot of competition in the MMO sphere, not just by MMOs themselves, but by other games and other genres as live service games. There's a lot of great games out there, and it's not a matter of a death by 1,000 cuts, it's, oh, this person may have this other game that appeals to them more specifically, while this person has this other game, instead of it just being like when World of Warcraft was going through its massive decline back in the days of Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands. There was really just Final Fantasy XIV there, alongside some other offerings poking their heads out of the sand, but like there was an obvious funnel going from World of Warcraft to Final Fantasy XIV. But like now, as a lot of these live service games that are out there, especially in the gacha scene, but in other scenes as well, it's not just gacha I'm talking about here, there's a lot of good bang for your dollar right now. Like Path of Exile 2 is only in early access and is already that incredible. And it's $30 now as early access. When the game actually properly launches, it'll be free to play. Games like Genshin, Honkai, Zenless Zone Zero, Wuthering Waves. Those gacha games, yeah, you can drop a lot of money if you whale, but if you just play free to play like I did for years, you get more frequent updates than an MMORPG, and sometimes it feels like more content in those updates as well. And if you vibe with the world and the characters and the actual gameplay there, well then you're good. What's the incentive to drop money every month and then on an expansion and then possibly on an in-game shop? Like, what is there? No, don't get me wrong, MMORPGs is my favorite genre of game, always has been and largely will probably always be. I grew up with old school RuneScape, I grew up with World of Warcraft, and I got into Final Fantasy XIV with Stormblood. I've been around the block here, but I've always been of the opinion that to be a true fan of something is not to swear blind allegiance to anything, or to just try and be endlessly optimistic and positive about that one thing. If you truly like something, you have to know when it's doing something wrong and be willing to call it out so that it can possibly, if they're willing, improve and become better over time. I'm not trying to say that Final Fantasy XIV has no content or is bad or you should feel bad for liking it. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is the game can be better, and we should always strive for our favorite things to be better, because when they end up being better, we win in the long run. And I know it's kind of popular right now to be pessimistic and negative about Final Fantasy XIV. In my tenure with Final Fantasy XIV, I have never seen the community be this bitter about the state of the game. Again, my tenure since I started with Stormblood. I can't speak to before before that. But in my experience, I have never seen the community be this resentful and bitter and negative about the state of the game. And I can understand why. And I don't think that negativity should just be written off as some hive mind on the internet or anything like that, because there are underlying factors at play that are bolstering that sentiment, because people still care. People may say they don't. People may say they're gone and that they're out. But so long as they're still angry, you still have a hook in them. They still care to some degree. The way you know you're cooked and when it's completely gone is when people stop talking altogether, when apathy sets in and people truly stop even caring to comment. That is when you cross the Rubicon. I do not believe Final Fantasy XIV is there yet, but I think it's going in that direction. And you want to know the funny thing? I'm probably going to end up liking 7.2, but I'm trying to speak from the perspective of how do we bolster this community? How do we grow it? How do we make it even bigger and better than ever? Because chances are I'm going to like 7.2. I thought 7.1 main story had a lot of problems, do not get me wrong, but I liked it a hell of a lot more than 7.0, and I'm interested to see where this whole Fiend story goes. Cosmic Exploration looks pretty dang cool. Occult Crescent looks really good. I liked Bozja. I really liked Bozja. If this is another iteration on that idea, sure, it may not be necessarily the most new thing ever, but if it worked before, okay, I like that. Iterate on it, make it better. I love the Hildebrand stuff. Way too short with the prologue, but now we're probably going to be starting the storyline. Hopefully there's a lot more to sink my teeth into. The new trial looks interesting. Fight design is one of Dawntrail's strongest elements in my opinion. Chances are I am going to thoroughly enjoy 7.2, but the question is how long am I going to? Because that is going to be the question on everybody's minds. And you want to know the funny thing? There's a part of me that is relieved that the content I truly care about outside of the main story, with Occult Crescent and things like Cosmic Exploration, I don't know if it's confirmed that those are coming in 7.25, but there's a part of me that wants them to be coming out in 7.25. Because you want to know the funny thing? There's another thing that I cover extensively on this channel that has a major release in late March. Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. Xenoblade X is a top 10 game of all time for me. So in this weird cosmic sort of way, there's a part of me that's relieved that we have this content junk. I'm going to be able to play that game and focus way more on that. And the stuff that comes out with 7.2, I can bang out in a couple of days. I can still talk about it and have fun with it, but I'll have plenty of time to juggle both experiences. Also, again, this is gonna be a bit of a kick in the balls. I love World of Warcraft again. You wanna know when the new patch is likely coming out for World of Warcraft? March. Like, in a weird way, this is lining up for me specifically, but if it doesn't for you, I can understand why you would be disappointed. I'm a nerd. I love gaming. I love a whole lot of games. I love playing a bunch of games. Not everyone likes to play games the same way that I do, and there's nothing wrong with that. I am also of the opinion that an MMORPG that asks for a monthly sub, and I'm not just talking about Final Fantasy XIV here, I made this same argument with World of Warcraft back in the day. If you pay a monthly sub, that monthly sub should be worth it. At least with Final Fantasy XIV, the argument can always be made that you know what you're going to get. It's never that big of a question mark when you're going to get new content and what that new content's going to look like. It's never really that big of a question mark. The predictability and stability of Final Fantasy XIV's content release cycle is both a blessing and a curse in that regard. Because while you know what you're going to get, you also know what you're going to get. And if that appeals to you, then you're in the money, you're in the gravy train, yeah? Choo-choo, full speed ahead, you're good. But if it's not, then we wind up here, where you have so many people bitter and upset and negative about the state of the game and losing optimism and losing hope, which used to be hallmarks and staples of the Final Fantasy XIV community. And I'm not of the opinion that it's only because of the story, or because of Wuk Lamat, or whatever, right? To me, those are easy scapegoat arguments to make. The true issue is the content. At the end of the day, no matter how much, and I've been talking about this for a while, no matter how much people want to talk about how important the story of Final Fantasy XIV is to the overall experience, I agree, it is important. It is not the only slice of the pie. At the end of the day, it is a video game. The game itself matters, and it matters a lot more than a lot of people think, and I think it's that element that is, maybe people don't know how to word it, or they can't put their finger on it. I am of the opinion that a lot of this resentment comes comes from that element instead of just the story. And the story being lackluster and disappointing for a lot of people revealed the faults and the issues people had in the back of their minds for the longest time they never really cared about because they had something else to grasp onto. But without that thing to hold on to, they're just falling. Let's go back to that monthly sub argument. Let's go back to competition and let's talk about World of Warcraft. Final Fantasy XIV sub gets you the Final Fantasy XIV experience, right? Makes sense. Compared to World of Warcraft, you get a monthly sub in that game. What do you get? You get retail World of Warcraft. Duh. But you also get multiple versions of Classic. Yeah? You get multiple versions of World of Warcraft. That is a powerful thing, because that is value. That is content. If the retail version of the game has a content drought, which it kind of has right now, funnily enough, as a lot of people are pretty much like checked out of retail WoW right now. Oh, look at that. Classic. Oh, look at that. Season of Discovery Classic, which is like Classic Plus. Oh, look at that. World of Warcraft Cataclysm Classic. Okay, maybe 5 people play that, but still, you know what? It is bolstering the content offering of the World of Warcraft sub. Final Fantasy XIV does not have a parallel there. When the game has a content drought, waiting for new content like it does right now, there's nothing to really fall back on. In World of Warcraft, it's by design. You can either take a break if you want to, which was the benefit of the Final Fantasy XIV methodology of doing things for the longest time, which World of Warcraft has recently adopted. But if you want to still play WoW, you have other versions you can try out and play. And they kind of timed the release schedule bearing that in mind. Like there was just a new version of Season of Discovery that just came out. There's blood in the water we talked about on this channel. When World of Warcraft announced its new housing, they took direct shots at Final Fantasy XIV. They didn't say Final Fantasy XIV, but anyone that's played the game knew exactly who they were referring to when they talked about how housing in World of Warcraft won't be given by a lottery, and if you want a house, you can get a house, and if you unsubscribe and you leave the game for a bit, there'll be no repossession of your house. We know exactly what game they were referring to with all of that. It's not some grand cosmic mystery. There's blood in the water. And I think Square Enix can either patch the wounds until they get to a safe place, an island which they can truly mend the issues that lie just beneath the skin, or we can continue to flail in the water until the sharks come and rip us apart. I am also of the opinion that these issues with Final Fantasy XIV, and I use that previous metaphor deliberately, because I do not believe these issues with Final Fantasy XIV can be solved overnight. It's a long-term thing, and you want to know when the real test for this will be? 8.0. It's not going to be in the remainder of Dawntrail. We can determine how much better the storytelling gets as Dawntrail goes on, and we can see how the content provided with the remainder of Dawntrail holds up. Sure, the real test, though, will be 8.0, because with 8.0 to 8.2, do we end up with the same drought again, or did they learn their lesson? Or are we just in this weird vocal minority on the internet, segmented off into our own bubble? And I just don't think that's the case. I just don't. When there's smoke, there tends to be fire. And I'm not trying to say Final Fantasy XIV is going to die or anything. No. But I think the real danger for Final Fantasy XIV is not living up to the potential that it truly has. And I'm not using past tense there. It still has this potential. Because I still think the game itself is really good. This is why I never agreed with people when they said end the game and work on another game. Because that wouldn't fix anything. That wouldn't address anything. Because the issue right now is philosophy. It is not the system. It is not how it's implemented into the game. Or whether or not it could be. This game has had good job design in the past. This game has had good content in the past. It's had varied content in the past. It's what Yoshi P talked about before Dawntrail came out, when it came to fight design specifically. The fear of disappointing people. The fear of letting people down and not wanting to have that happen. So you do things and you engage your development cycle in such a way so as not to upset as many people as you possibly can, or anyone. But the problem with that idea, the problem with that development strategy, is that it leads to what we have right now. Stagnancy. Iteration instead of innovation. And iteration is good, but in proper dosage. It can't be the only thing you have. Because Final Fantasy XIV is a long-term live service. You have to have a strong identity and know when to stick to your roots, but also when to branch away, to try new things, experiment, be bold and audacious, take risks, change things up. And it's a hard thing, and it sounds hypocritical, but that's just how human brains work. It is. And it's up to their job as the developers of the game to hone in on that and to make it work, to find the balance, to strike it when the iron is hot. And it's a hard thing to do. It's a really hard thing to do. And when you miss, you wind up with where we're at right now. But I don't think all hope is gone or abandoned. I think they do care about player feedback. I am not that pessimistic or negative about the state of the game or even the developers. I think they do care about what we think. I think they do want to make the game as good as it possibly can be. I just don't think these changes happen overnight. But the real test, like I said, will be 8.0. Will it change? Will it be better? Maybe. And I'm optimistic that it will be. But we have to see it to believe it. I don't think Final Fantasy XIV needs to completely reinvent itself or anything like that. I think it just needs to recapture that heart and soul that it once had. To stop being shy, to stop being afraid that there might be a negative forum post out there because someone didn't like a way something was implemented. If something doesn't work, we can talk about it, we can critique it, we can work on it, and then they can iterate on it or remove it or backtrack if they need to. Not everything is going to work, and you'll never be completely absolved of negative feedback. It's the internet after all. There's so many people with different vibes, different preferences, different things they want out of the game and out of the experience. You'll never be able to please everyone, so in the pursuit of trying to please everyone, you end up where we're at right now, where you may be able to please them for a time. But eventually, if you keep feeding someone the same meal time after time after time again, there will be people that like that. But for a lot of people out there, it'll grow old and boring and stale because they've had that flavor, they've savored that texture time and time again, so it's no longer fresh and no longer new, and the joys of that initial taste are nothing but a distant memory, bogged down under the weight of repetition. And I know this video is kind of deviated away from a conversation specifically about the monthly sub, but like these feelings, this sentiment that is growing in the community of Final Fantasy XIV, it's directly related to the monthly sub, because you're asking people to pay money if they have a house, to keep that house, but to be in this ecosystem, to constantly remind them that they're just not that excited about the state of the game right now. And where we're at right now is the result of years of behavior. And like I said, it can be fixed. Absolutely. It can be fixed. It can be remedied. It can be addressed. And I'm optimistic that it will be. The ideal scenario is that this content comes out swinging, and the little bit of hope, the little bit of optimism that I have right now is that with the Occult Crescent, we're getting that 48-man raid with it. We don't have to wait for it, I think. It's coming with the release of the Occult Crescent. And they made a point to address that. Good. That's what I want Final Fantasy XIV to do. Same thing with Cosmic Exploration. They said we're getting a new planet each patch. Good. Front load your content and then iterate on it consistently and frequently afterwards. Let this be smoke of a brilliant warm fire that is burning just under the surface, waiting to ignite into an inferno. But instead of a fire that just... Where am I even going with this metaphor now I think about it? I'm not freaking Aristotle or Socrates. I just want the game to be good. And I think it can be, and I think it will be. We just gotta wait and see. But while we're waiting and see, please pay monthly for the game. Yeah, kicking the balls, ain't it? I think it's easy to understand why a lot of people are pessimistic and upset right now because of that. Because if you just ask people to wait and they're not paying anything, that's way more of a less bitter pill to swallow than say, alright, wait, be upset, but also pay me money if you want to keep your house. And with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions, how you feel about the state of the game right now with Final Fantasy XIV, and what you believe they could do with the remainder of Dawntrail to really recapture and rekindle your excitement. I'd love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, and hear your perspectives. Stay safe, or if you are still excited, tell me why. I'd love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, and hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Go play some video games. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.